Hi everyone and welcome back to the channel. So I found this old kitchen two-seater dining table thrown out, and it had a bit of damage on the top, as you can see there on the veneer, and one of the support pieces was bent. So I thought I could make something out of this. So my plan was to make a desktop for my computer. So I wanted to use the metal frame. So the first thing I did was to remove the metal frame from this top. And it was all held together with Allen keys, so it came apart easily. So I wanted to spray this frame a different colour, so I needed to remove the feet, and they just popped off with a screwdriver. So now I wanted to make some marks at the bottoms of the legs to cut an amount off, because the top that I want to put onto this frame is a bit thicker than the original top, so I needed to lower the legs slightly to maintain the same height. So once I'd made those marks, I cut the sections out on the miter saw. Luckily my miter saw has a multi-purpose blade, so it cuts through metal. And I made sure that all the legs were equal lengths with the engineering square. I then used a file just to soften the edges. So now I needed to get it ready for spraying. So I gave it all a sanding down with a fine sandpaper. And this would give a good key for the primer. So before spraying, I just reassembled the frame to make it easier to spray. And then I just gave it a quick wiping down to remove any dust. And used a standard grey primer. So when that primer was dry, I gave it another light sanding over. And I chose a black gloss for the finish. And now that was done, it was time to work on the top. So I added those feet back on. So now I decided to use some pallet wood for the top, and I wanted to use the thicker pieces, the skid pieces, and make it into a sort of butcher's block style top by bolting quite a few of these pieces together. So I've got some there the same length and same thickness roughly, and I'm just seeing how the bolts will go. And I've got quite a few different types of wood there, so it should look quite interesting. You can see all the different colours. There's some orange, yellow, greyish kind of wood. So I put them all through the table saw to make sure they were all the same width. So now I needed to drill the holes for the bolts to go through, the threaded bolt. So I decided to make a jig, and for the holes I decided to use a bit that was slightly bigger than the bolt to give me a bit of leeway when I put the bolt through. So you can see there I've got a piece of aluminium composite, just a scrap piece. You could use a piece of thin plywood or a piece of aluminium, and I'm drilling some holes, which is where I want the holes to go on each piece of wood. And that will make sure that I get exactly the same 3 holes in the same spot on each piece. So now I just need some clamps, 2 small clamps you can see there. And I'm going to go onto the drill press one at a time and drill my holes. Once that was done, I just had a test fit with the bolts before I started to glue everything together. Just wanted to make sure they all fitted nicely, and to my surprise they actually did fit. I didn't need a hammer or anything to get them through. So to attach these bolts, I want to use some nylock nuts and some washers to make sure everything's nicely clamped together. So I sprayed the nuts and the washers with the same gloss black. And I wanted to recess the nuts and washers, so I used a Forstner bit just slightly bigger than the washer. And that would mean that the nut heads would sit nice and flush. So now it was time to measure for the bolts as these needed to be cut to the correct size, and I cut them slightly narrower than the depth of the table. So I clamped up the bolts and used a hacksaw. So now it was time to get everything glued up. So I used plenty of glue, and I applied the glue with an old paintbrush. And I painted it on every side, making sure it was completely covered. So then, before putting the bolts back through, I just used a framing square just to square everything up. And I added a washer and a nut onto one end. And then started to push them through. You could always make one of these butcher's blocks without bolts, but I don't have a planer thicknesser to get a really smooth surface for gluing up, so I chose the bolts, and I had them left over from a fence that I'm building anyway. So once they was all in, I tightened all the nuts up, and removed any excess glue squeeze out. So when the glue was dry, it was time to get the top nice and flat. And for that, I decided to use an electric planer. So I started off on the lowest setting, taking off a bit of material, and then I worked my way up to a slightly bigger setting, and I took my time. So when I got it fairly flat, I just felt with my hand, and I used the framing square to roughly work out where the high spots were, and just marked those areas with a pencil, and then continued to remove more material until it was as flat as I could get it, which was surprisingly quite flat. And I gave it all a good brushing down. Now it was time to get some filler in all those holes where the nails had been, and in all the cracks as well. I just took my time going over everything. I like the character that the holes give, but I would like them to be filled in. And the recessed part where the nuts go, I decided to paint gloss black as well. So I wanted to give an edge, just a trim all around the edges, and for that I used the palm router and just slightly rounded over the edges. So now it was time for sanding, and I started off with an 80 grit on the random orbital sander. And I took my time to remove all of the excess filler. And then I went over it by hand again with 80 grit. I then used the detail sander with 120 grit to go all around the edges and the top again. And I went over it again by hand with 120 grit. And then I finished it with 240 grit with the sheet sander to make it relatively smooth. And then I finished it by hand with the 240 grit. So for the finished, I decided to use some boiled linseed oil, and I thought that would bring out the grain nicely in the wood and bring out all those different colours as well. And this was definitely the most satisfying part of the project. Really nice to see the oil bring out all those colours. And with boiled linseed oil, instead of a rag, I like to use a makeup brush because they're really fine, and it gets the oil into the grain really nicely. So now I'm just wiping over with a cloth, removing any excess oil. And that was the top finished. So the final thing left to do was to attach the top to the metal frame. I used a piece of polystyrene just to protect the top and put it upside down. And I offered up the frame, and I used the engineering square again just to centralise everything to make sure it's in the correct position. To attach it, I'm going to use some good sized wood screws and washers. So then I drilled some pilot holes. And screwed in the screws. and that was the desk all finished. So a butcher's block style desk for my laptop. I was pretty pleased with how it turned out. Really impressed with all the different colours and the character in the wood, and I was happy with how flat I got it in the end. I got it pretty flat, pretty good, nice and square, and I think it looks quite nice. So I turned that old thrown out table into something usable again. So if you found this video useful, please like and comment, and also consider subscribing for more videos if you haven't already. And as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.